Hello everyone! We finally get some spoilers here. We're less than 20 days away from the release of Commander 2018, so it's about time. There were some other cards that were spoiled before. Geode Golem was the main spoiler for yesterday. I think it was the only one. When it deals combat damage to a player, you may cast your commander from the command zone without paying its mana cost. Still have to pay additional costs, but think about commanders like Progenitus, or just any Eldrazi that's insanely expensive. Casting them from your command zone for free is amazing. Then we have Coveted Jewel. This one is really bizarre, but also really good if you get to keep it. Enters the battlefield, you draw 3 cards. It is 6 mana. It does add 3 mana of any one color, so it's basically like a Gilded Lotus, but a little bit better because you get some card draw off of it. It is 6 mana though. So whenever one or more creatures an opponent controls attacks you and they're not blocked, that player gets to draw 3 cards and they gain control of Coveted Jewel, and then you untap it. Cool thing about this though is that in a group hug strategy, you're completely fine with that. You really don't mind playing something like this if they want to gain control of it. Well, then they have to feel bad about attacking you in the first place, and attacking you in the first place probably isn't going to be the number one thing on their mind when there are more competitive decks at the table. So very good design. I like it. Then we have Saheeli's Directive. This is kind of like a Genesis wave, but for artifacts. It's red. It also has Improvise, which is the artifact version of Convoke. You reveal the top X cards of your library, and you put any number of artifact cards with CMC X or less from among them onto the battlefield. So pretty powerful, and obviously one of the Planeswalkers here is going to be Saheeli, so this card has some potential. And then we have Infinite Atlas. Translation: pay 2 mana, tap it to draw a card, and you can only activate this ability if you control at least 3 lands with the same name. I don't think this is going to be super relevant in any of the decks. It's probably going to be something that you would save for monocolored, like white or red, something that doesn't already have the best card draw. And then we have Retrofit Err Foundry. This is a 1 mana artifact with a bunch of activated abilities. You pay 3 mana to untap it. Pay 2 mana, tap it to create a 1/1 colorless servo artifact creature token. You pay 1 mana and tap it to sacrifice a servo to create a 1/1 colorless Thopter artifact creature with flying. You can tap it to sacrifice a Thopter and create a 4/4 colorless construct artifact creature token. So that's pretty cool. You get to kind of trade up in value, a 1/1 servo for a 1/1 artifact with flying, and you can trade up for that with a 4/4 construct. So pretty interesting, but usually when I see a card like this with a ton of activated abilities, I think of Maricel the Pretender, one of the commander options from last year's commander set. Just a thought, pretty interesting, not super powerful, but it does have an untap ability, which might be relevant for that deck. And then we have Varchild, Betrayer of Kjeldor. This was the human knight that we saw in the pictures. Wasn't certain where this is going to end up, but my best guess is going to be the Jund deck, seeing as the blue-red one is going to be associated with artifacts, and this doesn't really look like it would fit in well with that deck. When she deals combat damage to a player, that player creates that many 1/1 red survivor creature tokens, and survivors your opponent's control can't block, and they can't attack you or a planeswalker you control. And when she leaves the battlefield, you gain control of all survivors, which is pretty cool because survivors you control are not hindered by this at all. They can attack, they can block. So if you have a red token theme that you want to fool around with, she might be pretty cool with that. And also if you're looking for any red knights to throw into those partner commanders, that deck from Battle Bond, I think she's a pretty decent addition. And now we actually move on to the 4 Planeswalker commanders, which my speculation was kind of off, but now we actually get to see what they are. We have Minato, the Fate Shifter, 3 mana Esper colors. Her +1 is draw a card, then put a card from your hand on top of your library. Her -1 is exile another target permanent you own, then return it to the battlefield under your control. This is relevant because other people can steal your stuff. You can exile it and then bring it back. And then her ult is choose left or right. Each player gains control of all non-land permanents other than Minato, very hard name to pronounce for me, controlled by the next player in the chosen direction. So you choose the left, everybody's going to do that. Pretty interesting, kind of off the wall. She's probably going to need further explanation looking at other cards in the deck just to see what she's capable of. But as is, she's pretty weird, not super strong. Her minus is probably the most powerful thing about her. Then we have Saheeli the Gifted. I apologize for some of these other images. They're going to be cut off a little bit, but Saheeli here doesn't have a problem. You create a 1/1 colorless servo artifact creature token with her +1. Her other +1, the next spell you cast this turn costs 1 less for each artifact you control when you cast it, which I mean, that's pretty good. At first I misread it and I thought it was going to be a super powerful storm enabler, but fortunately enough, they didn't make that mistake. Then her ult is for each artifact you control, you're going to create a token that's a copy of it and they gain haste. You exile them at the beginning of the next end step. Not super inspiring as far as artifact decks go. I mean, I guess we now have a Planeswalker that's going to enable any sort of artifact theme with Breya, more so now than before, but as a commander herself, nothing super special that we haven't really seen before. Cost reduction isn't uncommon with artifacts. Not saying you have to just play with artifacts, you could obviously just throw in some Eldrazi and make that work. Next we have Lord Windgrace, which is really cool. This is the Jund Planeswalker. It's +2, you discard a card, and then you draw a card. If a land card is discarded this way, you get to draw an additional card, so fantastic. It's a +2, and usually with Planeswalkers, if you can either get creatures to protect them or amazing card draw, that's going to set the foundation for making that Planeswalker really good and fundamentally just powerful. And then his -3 is return up to 2 target land cards from your graveyard to the battlefield. This is just untapped, and it can be any land cards. I think that's really good, especially because the plus just discards them. And then his ult is destroy up to 6 target non-land permanents, then create 6 2/2 green Cat Warrior creature tokens with Forest Walk. Alright, I'm just going to come out and say this. Looking at all of the Planeswalkers beforehand, this guy is probably the best all around, or at least before we look at the rest of the deck, because all of these abilities are super relevant, and there's already a ton of good cards that synergize with the land theme. Some people have pointed out they may have just made Lord Windgrace here, or any sort of Jund land theme, just so that you can play both the Gitrog monster and Omnath Locus of Rage in the same deck. Usually when you mention any sort of land theme, those two commanders are in the same breath. And they're both going to synergize really well with this guy, and you get good consistency in card draw, and you get a way to get lands back. You're probably not going to be struggling for mana, and overall a very good Planeswalker, especially if you're able to get to that ult and destroy 6 non-land permanents. That's crazy, and you get some creatures for it. Very strong ult, and overall probably the strongest Planeswalker on paper so far. Then we have the last card to go over here today. We have Ested the Masked, the final Planeswalker commander. She's 4 mana in Bant colors. In Bantments, she is the Bant commander. Did not think that was going to be the case. She looked more like she was going to be the Esper one. Her +2 is untap each enchanted permanent you control. Her minus is create a white aura enchantment token named Mask attached to another target permanent. The token has enchant permanent and totem armor, which is really badass, because if you remember totem armor from the original Zendikar block, it is basically armor. Once it's gone, then you can deal with it, but if it would be destroyed, the totem armor is destroyed instead. So sort of like a line of protection on your creatures. The cool thing about this is that it can enchant any permanent, so this can be on lands, this can be on artifacts. Pairing it up with the +2 is really sweet, because then you have things like Basalt Monolith, Arcanus the Omnipotent that you really want to untap, and then her ult is -7. Put the top 7 cards of your library into your graveyard and then return all non-aura enchantments from your graveyard to the battlefield, and then do the same for auras, which has the potential to be very powerful in an enchantment-themed deck. However, I don't really see her as being a super heavy enchantment-themed deck, but rather a deck focused around good tap abilities, because you want to untap enchanted permanents, and not many enchantments have tap abilities, so this is probably going to be a heavy aura deck, but not a heavy enchantment deck, which is kind of disappointing, because I really wanted to see some sort of Constellation sub-theme. Maybe there might be a Constellation sub-theme, but I got a little excited seeing the artwork that looked like Theros. Either way, though, I think she is pretty well designed. Very unique strategy. Can't wait to see how she ends up playing. But overall, probably my favorite would be Lord Windgrace. He looks really sweet. I love the land theme. And my least favorite would probably be Saheeli. Not really imaginative compared to the other ones, but I don't know. Some people really love artifact-themed decks. We already have a ton of them. They kind of dominate the format already. But you guys let me know what you think about these. I'm super excited. Probably going to end up playing with all 4 of these decks if I get a hold of them. You guys have a wonderful day. Void here signing off. See you all next video.